Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on victims of violent crime in Philadelphia. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Van Drew.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, Mr. Muser will be allowed to participate in today's hearing for the purpose of questioning the witnesses and will receive 5 minutes for that purpose. We welcome Congressman Muser to the Judiciary Committee for today's hearing. The chair will now recognize himself for an opening statement. When you don't prosecute bad guys, you shouldn't be surprised that you get more crime. When you defund the police, you shouldn't be surprised when you get more crime. And when you have a designated area for illegal drug use, you shouldn't be surprised when you get more crime. Philadelphia is doing all three of those things. And that's why we've seen the increase in crime we've seen in this great American city. And when you do those things, there are real consequences. Real bad things can happen when you engage in those kind of policies. And we're going to hear from witnesses today who will talk about the terrible things that have happened to loved ones within their family. At our field hearing in Manhattan, we looked at the administration of justice and the safety of communities. The committee continued to examine these principles with the field hearing in Chicago and, of course, hearings in Washington, D.C. Today, of course, we're here in Philadelphia to once again look at the administration of justice and keeping our communities safe. It appears Philadelphia is living up to its 1969, what the New York Times said in 1969, the nickname, quote, gang capital of America. By the end of 2023, Philadelphia surpassed 400 homicides, and there have been 24 in the first 30 days of this calendar year. Manhattan, Chicago, Washington, and Philadelphia have violent crime problems. But this is not the only thing they have in common. They all have soft-on-crime prosecutors who favor the criminals over the victims and their families. Since the current district attorney for Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, began his tenure in 2018, violent crime, particularly homicides, have increased, with crime rates reaching a peak in 2021. Philadelphia crime occurs so frequently and so drastically that there is a Twitter account, Philly Crime Update, to maintain a running database of the public, to be informed of major crimes throughout the city in real time. Over the past year, property crimes, including retail theft and carjackings, have risen by more than 15% compared to last year. Retail theft has skyrocketed by almost 28%, while vehicles have increased by 72%, although District Attorney Krasner blames this number on flaws in the cars themselves instead of the criminals. Go figure. Simply put, Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner is failing to prosecute criminals. Since his tenure began, Krasner's office has consistently declined to prosecute crimes in the city. In 2022, the Pennsylvania House of Representatives introduced a resolution to impeach Krasner for several of his policies that had caused the spikes in violent crime. Notably, the policies include not seeking cash bail for most cases, considering a defendant's immigration status in the plea bargaining process, and not prosecuting crimes like prostitution or marijuana possession. For instance, in 2016, before Krasner took office, the withdrawal and dismissal of violent crime cases accounted for 48% of all violent crime outcomes. That percentage increased to 60%. In 2019, 68% in 2020, and up to 70% in 2021. Philadelphia's pro-criminal policies embolden criminals, while victims fail to receive the justice they deserve. Krasner uses his office to crusade against what he considers, quote, social injustices, such as bail reform and reduced sentencing. However, his policies came at the expense of victims and lost lives. According to the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing, the number of violation of Uniform Firearms Act cases are initiated by Krasner's office but are ultimately withdrawn, dismissed, or prosecution discontinued in a disproportionately high comparison to other counties. Between 2015 and 2020, the number of violation of Uniform Firearms Act cases within Philadelphia increased from 7% to 21%. In that same time span, the Commonwealth's 66 other counties experienced an increase from 7 to 10. Additionally, those charged with a VUFA offense were charged with another offense within 3 years at a higher rate in Philadelphia compared to the statewide average. Further, the proportion of discontinued cases increased from 7% in 2015 to 13 in 2018, 18 in 2019, 21 in 2020. And it just keeps going up. By abandoning charges against VUFA offenders, Krasner's office has allowed more offenders who were recently arrested for possessing a firearm to return to the community without significant repercussions. We can see by who the Democrats invited to appear as witnesses at this morning's hearing that they will once again try to blame the guns instead of the people who use them to commit the crime. As we can see here in Philadelphia, when you don't enforce gun laws already on the books, new ones will have zero impact on the problem. But Larry Krasner did not take all the blame for the crime gripping Philadelphia. Before Philadelphia's 2023 mayoral election, the city council and the mayor caved to the far-left movement and demanded to defund the police. For example, in June of 2020, the city council approved a $33.3 million reduction to the Philadelphia Police Department budget with a commitment to reinvest the money in other areas of the community. With this move, Philadelphia joined other liberal-run cities like New York, Los Angeles, Austin, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Hartford, Seattle. In each of these cities, after drastically cutting police spending, crime rates continue to rise. Go figure. In Philadelphia, since January 2020, 500 people have been killed and more than 2,240 have been shot, which was a 40% increase more than the police have ever seen or ever recorded. It is a recipe for disaster that this committee has been seen repeatedly in Democrat-run cities. Soft on crime prosecutors, mixed with elected leadership defunding the police, lead to disaster.
this level. Local administrators fund the biodiversity committee, which is a island grant. These have had feedback. In 2023, continuing to 2024. So this year, the is 30% fewer units, or the third did to 2024. Plus, I plus, I 100 both M with still type. Well, you know, other than all evolving individuals, I've been for every time and I do more we have
Thank you and your entire family for your service to the communities and to our great country. Mr. Joel Fitzgerald, Ms. Pauline Fitzgerald. Mr. Fitzgerald has served in law enforcement for more than 30 years, including with the Philadelphia Police Department and as Chief of Police in Missouri City, Texas, Allentown, Pennsylvania, and Fort Worth, Texas, and Waterloo, Iowa. Ms. Fitzgerald served in law enforcement for more than 25 years with the Philadelphia Police Department, Stafford, Texas Police Department, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's Office, and the Tarrant County Criminal District Attorney's Office. One of the Fitzgerald children, Sergeant Christopher Fitzgerald, was shot and killed in the line of duty on February 18, 2023. Sergeant Fitzgerald was an officer with the Temple University Police Department. I want to thank you and your entire family for your service as well, and we feel for your great loss. I now want to recognize Mrs. Dean and Congresswoman Dean and Congressman Scanlon to introduce Mr. Garber and Dr. Abaya.
Thank you, Chairman, and I welcome all my colleagues to our great city of Philadelphia. I thank the testifiers for being here today. It's my pleasure to introduce a friend and an advocate and a colleague, frankly, Adam Garber. He is the Executive Director for Ceasefire PA. I've known Adam a long time in his capacity as an advocate around reducing and stamping out gun violence, along with, I believe we have Ceasefire PA folks in the audience. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us, and thank you for your advocacy. What Ceasefire does, and I know this personally because I was a state representative, is work with doctors, with advocates, with elected officials at the state level, trying to change legislation to reduce gun violence. And you've had some success this year since we got a Democratic majority in the Pennsylvania House. So thank you for your tireless advocacy around these things. I also do want to just say to Mrs. Fitzgerald, Dr. Fitzgerald, and Mrs. Fitzgerald in the audience, there really aren't any words except to say that we are serious about reducing gun violence. We thank you for your service. We are sorry for your grave loss. Mrs. O'Connor, to you as well. Thank you very much for being here, for offering us your husband's story of service. I hope what we can do here today is find solutions, things that work, instead of trying to politicize what's going on. So with that, Mr. Garber is introduced.
Thank you, and I do want to echo the remarks thanking our witnesses for being here today. And just to correct the record, Mrs. O'Connor's husband was promoted to sergeant posthumously in recognition of his service, so I wanted to make sure that was clear. I would like to introduce Dr. Ruth Abaya. She's an attending physician in the emergency department at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and a scholar at CHOP's Center for Violence Prevention. She's also an associate professor of pediatrics at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. She received her BA from Bluffton University, which I believe is in Mr. Jordan's district. She completed her residency, she got a combined MD, Masters of Public Health from Northwestern University. She completed her residency at Boston Children's Hospital and a fellowship at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Her research focuses include gun violence prevention with particular emphasis on access to firearms among high-risk adolescents, as well as patient-centered approaches to prevention that draw on the experiences of the youths themselves. As a fellow at the Stoneleaf Foundation, she's working to create a registry of those who've experienced firearm injuries in Philadelphia to identify the most promising practices for violence prevention and intervention in the city. Previously, Dr. Abaya led the injury prevention program at the Philadelphia Department of Public Health, where she oversaw the development of citywide program coalitions, including a hospital-based violence intervention program coalition and a cure violence interruption coalition. In recognition of her life-saving work, Dr. Abaya was named the Philadelphia Eagles' inaugural Inspired Changemaker of 2022. She's a member of the National Medical Council on Gun Violence and has presented on gun safety counseling at the National Physicians Alliance's National Conference. So welcome to all of our witnesses.
Thank you. We welcome our witnesses and thank them for appearing today. We'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? I do. Let the record reflect that the witness have answered in the affirmative. You all may sit down. Thank you. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. I think the clock is now working. Is that? I think that's the case, but we're gonna be a little flexible with time. And before recognizing Ms. O'Connor, I do also want to recognize we have a number of students from the University of Pennsylvania here today. We appreciate you all being here. I know there's some things going on your campus that we don't particularly like, but we're glad that you're here. We're glad that you're here with us today as well. Ms. O'Connor, you may begin.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Terry O'Connor. My husband, Jim, was a corporal in the Philadelphia Police Department. He had 23 years with the department, the last 15 in which he worked in the highly elite SWAT unit. On March 13th, 2020, Jim was shot and killed while serving an early morning high-risk murder warrant. Our lives were forever changed at 6:09 a.m. when Jim was pronounced dead. I last spoke with him about 11 p.m. the night prior. It was my 45th birthday. He kissed me goodbye, wished me another happy birthday, told me he loved me, and said, "I'll see you in the morning." I awoke to a phone call that Jim was shot, followed by police officers shortly after escorting me to the hospital where I saw my husband's lifeless body. It's a memory that will never escape my brain. How did this happen? I always thought Jim was more covered with larger vests and protective helmets. Unfortunately, he was shot in the forearm and in a small area near the left shoulder blade where he was not protected. What I would soon learn next about the entire situation is a scenario I could never fully imagine. When Jim and his team entered the house that morning, they were immediately fired upon. Approximately 12 to 16 shots were fired from inside that morning, 2 of which struck Jim. There were 10 guns, along with endless amounts of drugs found in the tiny one-bedroom the 4 men were hiding in. I should mention a SWAT officer returned fire, striking 2 people in the house. At one point, a voice came from inside the room asking the police to stop shooting at them because someone was shot inside the small bedroom. The officers then stopped and had the men come out of the room one by one. All 4 men, any of who could have been the potential fatal shooter, came out alive. I could speak easily for an hour about the lengthy criminal records these 4 males had. A month before Jim's murder, one of the males was arrested and let out twice for drug dealing. He had 3 open juvenile cases and 1 previous arrest as an adult. He was supposed to be on a GPS monitor, which he wasn't wearing either time. He could have been put in detention, but instead, under Larry Krasner, he was released on his own recognizance and no bail required. He was charged as an adult with carrying guns while selling drugs, but due to the low bail that was set, he walked out easily both times. He had many other run-ins with the law over the past few years and was described as a major drug dealer, a flight risk, and a danger to the community, and none of this mattered. The man that fired the shots that killed my husband was charged 2 years prior to Jim's death for carrying firearms without a license. He got 9 to 23 months in prison, but walked out of court that day a free man because the court accepted as his prison term the amount of jail time he previously served. As part of the deal, the district attorney agreed to drop 2 other charges, intentional possession of a controlled substance and a charge of carrying firearms in public. While on probation, 3 different times, the same male was brought before the judge on violations of parole, and the district attorney's office allowed him to continue being on probation. 1 year before Jim's murder, the same male was arrested again, this time for a direct violation of his probation. But a newly assigned assistant district attorney told the judge the district attorney's office was withdrawing the drug charge. Allegedly, the same month he was given the pass on the drug charge, this male committed a robbery and a murder. He was able to elude the police until March 30th, 2020. In the months to come after, prosecutors would come to learn about 5 murders this male committed after he proudly scraped the names into his prison cell wall. Another male that was in the room was on parole at the time for a 2016 gun possession case, which he had served state prison time. The 4th male in the room happened to be wanted for one of the murders as the main shooter. Again, I could go on and on about this male and the many other arrests he had in the prior years, along with the rap sheets of the other 3 males in the room that fateful morning. That leads us to where we are today. We have a city in shambles. We have a district attorney who says crime is down. Well, obviously, if you don't prosecute criminals, of course it appears that way. How many 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and even more chances are to be given? I've always said it seems to take something personally happening to your family to have people truly understand the repercussions of these lenient policies. The one thing that gives me some peace of mind with this case is that these men were charged federally. That gives us the best chance these men never see the outside of a jail cell ever again. They took away something from us that could never be replaced, and they need to face the most severe consequences. I have a daughter whose father didn't get to walk her down the aisle at her wedding, a son who continues to follow in his father's footsteps, trying to make him proud while raising his 2 daughters who will never know their pop. And then there's myself. I became a widow the day after I turned 45. I come to hate my birthday. We were 1 month shy of our 25th wedding anniversary, and I was left to figure out a life that I could have never imagined. I said from the beginning, even if it gets me nowhere, I will use my voice to speak out in every way possible about how Jem's death didn't need to occur. My husband got up and went to work just to do his job. If our district attorney, prosecutors, and judges did their job, maybe he would still be here today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Connor. Mrs. Fitzgerald.
Please allow me to share the last moments of our son's life. Temple University Police Sergeant Christopher Fitzgerald.
Ms. Fitzgerald, could you pull that really close?
Yes.
Thank you.
They were captured on a Ring camera video. The date, Saturday, February 18th, 2023, is seared in our hearts and our mind. On that day, at approximately 7 p.m., Chris was on patrol in a marked patrol vehicle and engaged in a Bluetooth telephone call with his friend before taking notice of the defendant and his cohorts. Chris focused on the masked defendant and attempts to stop the defendant. Chris is wearing a police bicycle officer uniform consisting of two-tone neon reflective yellow Temple University bike uniform shirt with police patches and the word police clearly identifying him as a law enforcement officer. Chris transmits over his police radio his call sign and that he is in pursuit. The Ring camera captures the defendant fleeing on foot, and moments later, Chris catches the defendant. He can be seen and heard providing clear, articulate, and lawful verbal commands to the defendant to get on the ground. Chris is captured in the video using his training and the minimum amount of force necessary to bring the defendant under his control. He is attempting to make a lawful arrest. The defendant is actively resisting arrest, and he has already made the conscious decision that he refuses to surrender peacefully. In fact, you can hear Chris telling him, "Come on, bro." This phrase reinforces that Chris was using minimum force and wanted to obtain voluntary compliance from the defendant. The defendant made the conscious decision to refuse to surrender peacefully. "Come on, bro," will be the last words Chris will ever state. The defendant is then heard saying why. This is the moment immediately preceding his decision to discharge the first of 6 gunshots to strike our son in the middle of a busy Philadelphia street. Chris neither beat the defendant nor utilized inappropriate force. Our collective professional opinion, garnered over approximately 60 years of collective law enforcement experience in 4 U.S. states, is the subject used this as an apparent calculated ruse to distract and mentally disarm Chris by feigning compliance and making him believe that he was going to lawfully surrender before viciously firing and striking him. Chris immediately falls to the ground onto his back from the defendant's first shot, which incapacitates him. He is not observed moving without external manipulation again. The next point in the video reveals the defendant's malicious and callous depravity. He stands over Chris while incapacitated and inexplicitly makes the conscious decision to shoot him in that state 5 additional times. Each of the 6 total shots are calculated fatal kill shots that all strike our son in the neck, face, and head. The defendant intentionally ensured Chris's death by shooting him and striking him above the body armor. Those actions make it apparent that the defendant is highly intelligent, and his actions were both purposeful and calculated. He knew that ballistic vests failed to cover the areas above an officer's neck and capitalized upon that knowledge. He placed himself in the circumstances that he practiced for. The defendant's crimes could have stopped there, but as the video evidence supports, they did not. He proves himself to be even more than a highly sophisticated criminal because he further diversifies his criminality, distinguishing himself from other dangerous shooters. He did not stop at the cold-calculated murder of a law enforcement officer. He commits 2 robberies using a firearm, doubling down on his nebulous achievement. He commits a carjacking, adds aggravated robbery, reap, pick, pile, VUFA, and a plethora of associated charges. All of this criminal All of his criminal acts occur in a heavily populated neighborhood, while onlookers and witnesses can never unsee the psychological trauma he inflicted and the physical jeopardy he placed them in. They were frozen in their vehicles. This defendant elevates the level of felonious criminality, committing a robbery on a mortally wounded uniformed officer. The level of criminality or pure evil that it takes after shooting a uniformed police officer, this defendant then lifts my son's limp arm in order to access his pockets to rob him of his personal belongings. The defendant moves on to Chris's holstered firearm. He forcibly yanks it with extreme force that the holster is moved from the right side of his body to near his zipper. He intended to kill a cop that day. While Chris lay mortally wounded, this defendant's criminal mind raced as he feverishly attempted to take his service weapon. It was not enough to possess the gun that already had our son's blood on it, the one used to kill Chris. He had every opportunity to flee the scene after the first shot disabled Chris, but decided to rob Chris and the Asian male complainant he calmly carjacked thereafter. Only he can tell us whether he intended to sell the second gun or commit further crimes with it. The defendant displayed wanton disregards for law enforcement, and his indifference to human life is obvious. All of the aforementioned behaviors occurred in a densely populated area in the presence of witnesses who were recklessly placed in serious danger because of his continuing course of criminal conduct. The only way to stop these murders of police officers is to enforce our laws and to hold those persons placed in positions to enforce these laws accountable. These criminals must be punished to the highest extent of law in order to ensure that they are not free to commit those crimes again. There is no do-over when you take a life. Our loved ones are gone forever. The pain and trauma from our young son's family will be felt for generations. My daughter-in-law, Marissa, is now a widow and must now raise their children as a single mother. This defendant broke a two-parent home, leaving our grandchildren fatherless. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Said like only a mom can say it. Dr. Fitzgerald, you're 5
Pretty
minutes.
hard to follow up my wife's testimony, but thank you, Chair Jordan. Thank you to the committee members here today, in particular, those who are concerned about these soft on crime approaches in this country and equally weak prosecutorial efforts, let's say, that have happened in the city and basically eviscerated a once noble police department, endangering the lives of all Philadelphians. We were both Philadelphia police officers for many years, so we identify what these officers are going through. In case of the murder of our son, Chris Fitzgerald, the DA here in the city has displayed an incessant and transparent unwillingness to expose a person of privilege to the death penalty. This is a capital crime in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This consideration is what the DA gives a jury. He empowers the jury to consider death. It's on the books, it's the law. When you raise your right hand as the district attorney in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States and of this Commonwealth. I beg to, first of all, I'd like to see if Mr. Krasner's here. I don't think he is, but he had every opportunity to be here. And when he raised his arm and he swore, like we swore today, and to testify before you, to uphold those laws, he's not doing so when what my wife described meets every prong of a death penalty case. I don't care what your position is on the death penalty. What I do care about is that we uphold the law. The criminals in Philadelphia look at everything that goes on here. They watch TV, they listen to the radio. They know that Krasner gives them a free pass. We as a family, my daughter-in-law, my wife and I, on the 24th of this month, had to present the various aggravators before the district attorney's office. We should never have had to do that. A district attorney in any state or commonwealth in the United States should stand up for the families and the victims of violent crime, and those folks should also be the people who represent us and not have to be lobbied to do the right thing by law. We're not asking for anyone to die. We are asking for the rightful consideration to be given to an impaneled jury so they can decide what the fate is of this heinous murderer. This DA took almost 1 year to even take this preliminary hearing for our son's murderer to court. 1 year. 4 continuances he's allowed, more than allowing the defense to gather their information on mitigators in this case, well beyond that, to let the press die down, with the hope that since we come from Colorado, that we wouldn't come here, but we're Philadelphians. We care about the city. We care about the crime that's going on. And with all due respect to some of the testimony we've heard here already, this city is coming out of pre-pandemic crime numbers. I should say we're hitting pre-pandemic crime numbers. So crime's down in many cities across the country, but what level of crime is acceptable? I beg you. Certainly not acceptable to the police officers or to the community members that are latchkey and affected by the violent crime that keeps them in their homes inside of neighborhoods and don't allow them to enjoy the fruits of their labor. This prosecutor, Larry Krasner, has ceded the advantage to the defense. He represents us, he represents my daughter-in-law, he represents my dead son. And he ceded the advantage to the defense attorneys. I'll say this, it's unfortunate. He did a press conference yesterday and he trotted out his supporters, and many of whom are black and brown, just like we are. We're a blended family, obviously. He had religious leaders in the city who've traded the potential for justice and a more livable city, in this case, for our son as well, to either be silent or to advocate for somebody that doesn't do the right thing, to advocate for someone that refuses to thoroughly punish individuals who deserve it, to advocate for someone who opens a revolving door for criminals in this city and around this city to come in and prey on citizens like the shooter did the night that he attacked our son. That's the power of some of the, as I call it, regressive district attorneys out there who mask their dangerous personal agendas and destroy hundreds of families. And they say it's under the guise of creating fairness and equality and being able to bridge the disparate impacts that it has on communities. But what about the impacts that it has on those community members who are actually affected by violent crime? Yesterday, if you were to listen to the testimony of Mr. Krasner and the pundits that he pushed up to the stage, it would have you believe that everything's okay. It's far from okay in the city. There are some great people working to correct things. Kevin Bethel is the new police commissioner. It's like family to me. He is actually the person that encouraged me to become a police officer. I have every confidence in the world in him. What I don't have confidence in is that Mr. Krasner will align himself with the mayor of the city, with everyone in the city trying to reverse the negative trends of violent crime in a true partnership and in a meaningful partnership, because he is part of the problem. He opens that door. He creates the recidivist opportunities to attack Philadelphians. I realize I'm running out of time, but I have to mention the vigilant efforts of the Philadelphia Police Department, the Temple University Police Department, and those who are out there every day and who keep their chins up. It's up to you, members of the committee, to help them keep their chins up, to keep bringing up the fact that pre-pandemic violent crime levels are still unacceptable. Yes, we've seen doubles, the amount of homicides in some cities and triple over the last few years. But even in 2018, those numbers were greatly elevated from previous years. We got to do something different. Philadelphia stakeholders have to do something different. I'll close out by saying I hope the testimony helps citizens better understand that district attorneys and the people that they're able to push out in press conferences aren't necessarily representative of the city as a whole, nor the feelings of citizens as a whole. We can conduct studies. We can do it now. I will help conduct those studies. But we need to ask every Philadelphian, every Philadelphia stakeholder how they feel. Because we have folks that align themselves with a certain financier who facilitate this notion that cities, inner cities in particular, are safe, when I know that the residents in inner city Philadelphia feel differently. I'll help them put those studies together, and I'll help them assess those results in a fair and unbiased manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mrs. Fitzgerald, thank you, and Marissa, thank you, and Ms. O'Connor, God bless you all. Dr. Abaya.
Good morning. Thank you to the committee for inviting me to speak to you today. My name is Ruth Abaya, and I'm privileged to serve as an attending physician at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia in the Division of Emergency Medicine. I've had the opportunity there to work on the issue of community violence through our Center for Violence Prevention, and I've had the past privilege, as you heard, to serve as the Injury Prevention Program Manager for the Department of Public Health. The issue of community violence is of critical importance to the patients we serve in Philadelphia. Violence has long been a public health crisis with significant impact on the lives and well-being of each and every resident of the city, and with a disproportionate impact in Black and brown communities with histories of chronic disinvestment. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Philadelphia and many cities across the nation saw historic increases in firearm-related violence. In 2020, firearm-related injuries became the leading cause of death for children and youth 1 to 19 years of age nationally. The impact of firearm violence is not just limited to patients and their immediate families. Research conducted at CHOP has demonstrated that those who live within a quarter mile of a shooting incident were almost twice as likely to come to the emergency department for mental health-related needs. This research also demonstrated that the closer a child's proximity to a violent injury, the stronger the effect. Our communities need true and lasting solutions to this crisis. Like many cities, we are seeing some promising reduction in firearm-related violence. However, 2023 remained above pre-pandemic levels. We must use this opportunity to learn more about what works to sustainably reduce violence and create resilient, thriving communities. I came to this work through my clinical training, where I often had conversations with youth who had expressed no expectation of living past their 25th birthday. Too often, survivors would be returned to their society with no resources to provide an off-ramp to safety, hope, or healing, and no connection to strategies that could interrupt the cycle of violence. Community Violence Intervention, or CVI, is defined as a suite of evidence-informed strategies that aim to reduce violence through engaging the community, especially those at highest risk. Individuals or groups are then connected to critical resources and services such as employment and trauma healing, and to interrupt cycles of retaliatory violence. This work depends on the knowledge and expertise of credible messengers, individuals from community who have lived experience and are well-positioned to engage those at highest risk in CVI strategies. Community violence intervention is powerful because it has the potential to impact those at highest risk of involvement in violence on either side of the gun, changing a person's trajectory and impacting their life long-term. One CVI strategy that creates a bridge between the hospital and the community is hospital-based violence intervention, or HVIPs. These programs are multidisciplinary programs that provide safety planning, services, and trauma-informed care to patients with violent injuries. The CHOP Violence Intervention Program, or VIP, provides long-term comprehensive case management services to youth who come to the emergency department for a violent injury. This work recognizes the long-term physical, emotional, and social impacts of violence. HVIPs have shown potential in reducing exposure to repeat violent injury, supporting basic needs and mental health needs, improving psychosocial outcomes, and reducing exposure to the criminal justice system. This model is part of the CHOP Center for Violence Prevention's comprehensive approach to addressing violence and its impacts in our communities. Violence and the resultant trauma can occur at many points in a child's life and a person's life, and the center does work with community partners around bullying prevention, addressing intimate partner violence, firearm safety and safe storage, and suicide prevention, all while pursuing rigorous research to understand the impact of these programs and strategies. The CHOP VIP program is one of several HVIPs in the city of Philadelphia, which cover most of our level 1 trauma centers. In my time at the Department of Public Health, we created an HVIP coalition that provided a community of practice around programs who were meeting the needs of violently injured patients throughout the city. In partnership with a similar coalition of violence interruption programs, such as Cure Violence, formed at the same time, these programs form a critical part of the CVI ecosystem, defined as the city's violence intervention infrastructure, connecting stakeholders who work in various sectors to implement a comprehensive slate of strategies that address the dynamics of violence. Working within a community of practice holds potential to limit duplication, identify common best practices, and improve the quality of services throughout the city. Many of these models have a critical point in common. They all seek to engage those at high risk of exposure to the trauma of violence. A critical role for communities of practice is to work together to strengthen the local ecosystem so that this work is streamlined and impactful. I want to end with the story of one young man whose story exemplifies how life courses can be altered by the work of CVI and why continued investment in this work can be so transformative. This young man was a survivor of violence, but he also had a complicated chronic disease. Between navigating his injury, contending with housing insecurity, and attempting to return to school, his physical and mental health were at risk. Through an HVIP, his violence intervention specialist advocated for him in the school setting, in finding stable housing, in securing his medications, in attending his follow-up appointments with his trauma team, and in getting connected to mental health services. These interventions likely saved his life and provided an opportunity to exit the harmful cycle of violence and find safety and health. Far too many survivors of violence could benefit from these powerful programs. The future of community violence intervention holds a great deal of promise for communities like Philadelphia, and investment in these models in the areas of programming and research can help cities build a sustainable path to violence reduction and community safety. We stand ready to support any such efforts. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify about this important issue. Looking forward to taking questions.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Bruschetta.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman and committee members, good morning. My name is George Bocchetto, and I have lived and worked in Philadelphia for the better part of 50 years now. I'm a trial lawyer, and during my career I've handled many high-profile and important matters in courts all over this country, including the United States Supreme Court. I was also engaged as the lead attorney to handle the impeachment process for Larry Krasner in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 2022. It is an honor to be invited to give testimony to this committee on this most important topic, and I thank Chairman Jordan for the opportunity. Larry Krasner took over the district attorney's office in 2018. What followed was an unprecedented explosion of crime and violence. Through a combination of progressive policies and endless incompetence, Krasner has actively encouraged criminal behavior. In Krasner's first term in office, the murder rate in Philadelphia increased by 78%. And I would wish to point out that when we note currently about the reduction in the murder rate, we're talking about a reduction from an unprecedented explosion of murders in this city. And the reduction level is still outrageous. In a single year, 562 human beings had their lives stolen from them. And it's predictably the result of these nihilistic policies that Larry Krasner has implemented. And who they impact more than anybody are the so-called persons who he's trying to protect, the minorities and the poor communities. Those are where the impacts are felt the heaviest. I got involved many years ago in a case with Larry Krasner in perhaps the most notorious case in Philadelphia's history, the killing of Officer Daniel Faulkner by one Mumia Abul Jamal, who admitted to the killing, was tried by a jury, and was convicted with overwhelming evidence. Since that time, some 30 years ago, Mr. Jamal has filed a series of appeals and repeat motions in an effort to gain his release from prison. And he was singularly unsuccessful until Mr. Krasner took office. During that time, Mr. Krasner had the 5th PCRA appeal filed by Abul Jamal and literally ignored the filing, missed briefing deadlines, told prosecutors to stand down. He was literally tanking the case to set free perhaps the most notorious killer in Philadelphia's history, and a killer, by the way, who is notorious internationally. I was engaged by Maureen Faulkner, Danny Faulkner's widow, and I filed an emergency petition in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court known as a King's Bench petition. I bypassed the trial level, I bypassed the appellate level, and I went right to the Supreme Court because of the seriousness of what was taking place. And I pointed out to the Supreme Court the terrible, irreconcilable conflicts of interest that Larry Krasner had in trying to tank this conviction. And thank God the Supreme Court stepped in, and we now continue to maintain Mr. Jamal where he belongs, in prison. There are so many other cases that I can point to and give you examples of individuals who committed crimes, violent crimes, who are allowed to go free on bail, who were released on their own recognizance, who were violating the Uniform Firearms Act and are back on the streets committing murders in this city, committing carjackings, committing violent crimes. And this is all directly as a result of Mr. Krasner's policies. And I would be happy during the questioning period to detail exactly how some of those came about. Let me just also say this. It's not just that Mr. Krasner has taken upon himself to be derelict in his responsibilities in violent crimes and murder cases. He also regards himself as a one-man legislature. You know, in Pennsylvania, we have laws against prostitution, and those laws are designed to help drug-addicted young women who are victims of human trafficking and abuse. Larry Krasner has taken it upon himself and has issued a memorandum to his staff. We will no longer in Philadelphia prosecute prostitution. He overruled the Pennsylvania legislature in one fell swoop, and no one's challenged him on it. Well, we challenged him on the impeachment proceedings. Theft is also a crime in Pennsylvania. But in Philadelphia, you can steal up to $500 in a convenience store or a Wawa or a department store, and you will not be prosecuted. This is the one-man legislature of Larry Krasner, and it has led to a lawlessness, a street crime, a level of disrespect that affects everybody's quality of life and begs the criminals to become more emboldened and more dangerous on our streets. I'm here because I've dedicated my professional career to due process and the rule of law. And I can tell you, being in the trenches, working in this city directly one-on-one with the Krasner administration, the idea of due process of law and rule of law are abused, ignored, and disregarded. And it needs to stop. Thank you so much for hearing me out.
Thank you. Mr. Garber.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, and members of the U.S. House Judiciary Committee. Thanks for visiting Philadelphia and discussing how we can make this community and other communities safer. As the Executive Director for Ceasefire PA, we're the Commonwealth's gun violence prevention organization, and our team includes gun owners who believe responsible gun ownership and gun safety laws go hand in hand, survivors of this crisis, doctors who've treated wounds in the emergency rooms, parents who worry about their children, and faith leaders who've counseled families at the worst moments in their lives. I made my home in Philadelphia 17 years ago. I ride SEPTA nearly every day, often with my 5-year-old child, and commute around the city, including today. As you've heard, we saw an enormous spike in gun violence and crime over the beginnings of the pandemic. 1,000 more residents died from gunfire during that time. But contrary to public perception, criminal activity and drugs were not the primary drivers of this violence. A review of more than 2,000 shootings by law enforcement, public health experts, courts, and other public safety experts found arguments were responsible for 50% of all shootings. Drug trafficking was only 18%. This also aligns with what we know about widespread firearm access. It can turn everyday interpersonal conflicts into fatal accidents, including arguments on SEPTA buses, sitting in a car, and in a very sad Philadelphia incident while waiting for a cheesesteak during the pandemic in 2021. Social media further amplifies this conflict, especially among the city's youth. It's worth noting as we talk here that the same problem is playing out in other communities across the Commonwealth, even at higher rates. In 2022, the city of York had a higher homicide rate per capita than Philadelphia. Violence is going down, though. Gun homicides dropped in 2023 by 22% in Philadelphia. And for the current year, they have dropped another 44% compared to the same time period in 2023. We are on pace for less than 300 homicides, and while each of those is an awful catastrophe that we must still do more to prevent, it shows we're headed in the right direction. 3 things are driving the reversal. The emotional and mental trauma of the pandemic receded. Second, gun sales began to subside. There were more than 4 million firearm transfers from 2020 to 2022 in Pennsylvania. And lastly, and most importantly, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and state-level funding, there was a historic investment in community-based violence prevention programs. Those used trusted messengers to de-escalate conflict, help victims recover after shootings, stopping retaliations. Statewide, more than $200 million was given to district attorneys, local law enforcement, and nonprofits to address the crisis. In the case of Philadelphia, the city's Group Violence Intervention Program received funding, and groups that were involved in that program were 38% less likely to be involved in shootings than those that were not. Still, we must do more about this crisis, as we've heard today, and this committee, Congress, and the PA General Assembly has a critical part to play. There are multiple popular bipartisan gun safety policies to prevent a shooting before it happens, rather than more victims being created and afterwards. 3 already passed the Pennsylvania House of Representatives with bipartisan support: universal background checks, extreme risk protection orders, and banning ghost guns. Ghost guns are the IKEA of firearms. You can order them online. They're mostly built, and in less than an hour with simple tools and no significant expertise, put together a firearm as deadly as any you'd buy at a dealer. In September of 2022, rec center worker Tiffany Fletcher was killed with one, and it's become a lucrative business for gun traffickers in the area. In Montgomery County, a trio was making a profit by turning ghost gun kits into firearms and then selling them. A few weeks ago, House Bill 777, to treat ghost guns like other firearms requiring background checks and serialization, passed with bipartisan support, including Representative Martina White, the former head of the Philadelphia GOP and Majority Caucus Secretary. A second pathway for firearms used in violent crimes are stolen or lost firearms. As the Cambria County's district attorney recently told media, there are a lot of stolen guns floating around. They show up on crime scenes on a very regular basis. Stolen guns also rose in conjunction with the rising violence being discussed today, climbing 38% between 2019 and 2021 in Philadelphia. But there's no requirement that you report your missing weapon if it goes away, if you lose it or it's stolen. And responsible firearm owners do report their missing firearms. It's the irresponsible ones, and those intent on trafficking guns that do not, and Congress could make it a requirement. Lastly, we should talk about where these guns are always coming from. If a health inspector didn't show up at your favorite restaurant for years, even a decade, you'd be much more likely to get food poisoning or find rats, because inspectors help ensure everyone follows the safety guidelines. Unfortunately, licensed firearm dealers operate in a world where they're inspected every 5 to 7 years by ATF. Most dealers will have few problems with these inspections. They work hard to ensure their weapons are not at crime scenes, even cooperating with law enforcement around suspicious purposes. But an analysis by the Brady campaign of PA's Track and Trace program, which was designed to help law enforcement prevent the trafficking that's enabling all this violent crime, found that 50% of recovered crime guns in the Commonwealth came from only 1% of dealers. The U.S. Congress needs to invest resources in the cornerstone of our public safety system to help law enforcement prevent the trafficking that's enabling this violence. The responsibility of this crisis rests with the General Assembly and the U.S. Congress, who have the ability and responsibility to address the firearms use in violent crimes. You must continue funding for effective community-based programs that help prevent shootings and retaliations, and strengthen gun safety laws to keep firearms from individuals intent on doing harm, slow gun trafficking, and support law enforcement efforts to address it. It will save even more lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gerace.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, committee members. Today, I would like to draw your attention to the failures of District Attorney Larry Krasner, or as we know him, let him go, Larry Krasner, in Philadelphia. Over the past few years, Krasner's radical progressive policies have had devastating consequences, leading to a rise in violent crime and endangering the lives of innocent citizens. One of the most concerning aspects of Krasner's tenure is his approach to criminal justice, which has resulted in the release of violent inmates who have gone on to commit heinous crimes, crimes that we've heard today. He prioritizes the pursuit of his ideological agenda over public safety. Let him go Larry has put the lives of Philadelphia residents at risk, or Uncle Larry, as the criminal underground in Philadelphia refers to him so lovingly. The tragic fact is that multiple individuals have lost their lives due to the dangerous individuals he has allowed back in the community. Moreover, the city of Philadelphia has experienced a significant increase in violent crime under Krasner's failed leadership. Over the past 6 years, the city has seen a troubling surge in homicides, shootings, and violent offenses. This alarming trend is a direct result of Krasner's misguided policies that have failed to effectively address and deter criminal activity. Philadelphia has been significantly affected by the increase in violent crime under District Attorney Larry Krasner's policies. The rise in violent crime has had several consequences for the city and its residents, including loss of lives. So it was mentioned earlier today, this year we are down about a dozen homicides. 12 bodies, I say, would be a lot. It's a good increase, right? I think we could all agree on that. So what is it to be said when one person has murdered more than 12 people? One person is the result of the death of the murder of more than 12 people. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's a lot more than 12 people. Because of Larry Krasner, more than 12 people are dead today, and there's some of them, their family members are talking on his panel right now. One is too much. One is too much. He's a serial killer by proxy. It's his policies that are killing the residents of Philadelphia. The increase in violent crime, particularly homicides and shootings, has resulted in a tragic loss of lives in Philadelphia. This loss of life has a devastating impact on families, communities, and causing immense grief and trauma, which we have all witnessed here today. Fear and insecurity. The rise in violent crime has created a climate of fear and insecurity among Philadelphia residents. People are concerned about their safety and the safety of their loved ones, which can lead to a decrease in community trust and engagement. I encourage everybody up on the committee board, walk around Philadelphia for yourself and talk to Philadelphians. Pick them by will, and you will hear these sentiments by all of them. Doesn't matter what race, creed, color, or background. You will hear these sentiments. Disruption of daily life. The prevalence of violent crime can disrupt the daily lives of Philadelphia residents. It may discourage people from going out at night, limit their participation in community activities, and affect the vitality of public spaces. Economic impact. I would say he had a more devastating impact to Philadelphia than COVID has. This increase in violent crime has an economic impact on Philadelphia. Businesses may be hesitant to invest or expand in areas with high crime rates, and tourism may decline due to safety concerns. This can result in a loss of job opportunities and economic growth for the city. Not just in violent areas. Go downtown Philadelphia, the pearl of the city. Go look at all the businesses that are boarded up. That is a direct link to Larry Krasner and the crime that is going on. During the riots, 2,000 protesters were arrested. And a wave with his scepter, he got rid of those prosecutions. They were all gone. You know who got prosecuted, though? The Philadelphia Police Department. Went after Lieutenant Joe Bologna, one of the most respected officers in the police department, for a lawful arrest that he was committing. He dragged that man through the mud, and every time he went to court, it got laughed out of court and thrown away, and his district attorneys were reprimanded because it's a joke. If it wasn't so serious, it would be a joke. Strained community relations. The rise in violent crime can strain relations between different communities within Philadelphia. Excuse me. It can lead to an increased tension and mistrust amongst residents, making it harder to build strong and cohesive communities. It's deeply concerning that Krasner harbors a very strong animosity, and I would say severe hatred towards the Philadelphia Police Department. His personal vendetta against the police has created a hostile environment and hindered the collaborative efforts needed to maintain law and order. By undermining the very institution responsible for protecting our communities, Krasner has compromised the safety of Philadelphia residents and hindered the police's ability to effectively carry out their duties. In conclusion, District Larry Krasner's radical progressive policies have proven to be a disastrous failure for the city of Philadelphia. His ill-conceived approach to criminal justice has resulted in the release of violent offenders, leading to tragic consequences for innocent citizens and our police officers and law enforcement community. The alarming increase in violent crime over the past 6 years is a testament to his failed leadership. Furthermore, Krasner's antagonistic stance towards the Philadelphia Police Department has only further exacerbated the challenges faced by law enforcement in keeping our communities safe. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed with questions under the 5-minute rule. The chair recognizes the chairman of the subcommittee on crime of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs. You both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today, for your poignant testimony, and we appreciate you coming out and testifying. And I'm just going to go with some of the questions, with some questions that came to my mind as I was listening to your testimony. And I want to just make this statement here. The health inspector analogy really doesn't work well for you. Because if the health inspector goes in and finds a lot of violations and then turns around and walks out, guess what you have? You got more food poisonings, more illness that comes. And that seems to be what's happening here. So I'll talk with you, Dr. Fitzgerald, first. Is that what's happening here? Are we seeing if you analogize that, if Larry Krasner is analogized to the health inspector, is he letting people go? Is he letting these violations go, which is resulting in more problems for the city, more crime in the city?
In my belief, that's a correct assessment. When a district attorney fires tenured attorneys in his office, which is their prerogative, he's an elected district attorney, he can hire and fire whoever he'd like. However, he lost intellectual capital within the district attorney's office and the ability to therefore put the best cases together and prosecute offenders that deserve prosecution. Rookie district attorneys are now plea bargaining cases down, and that's affecting everyone in Philadelphia. So yes, it is analogous to a pest inspector who fails to perform their duties and allows, in essence, the city to be infested.
Thank you. Mr. Bacchetto, when we talk about the criminal justice system, there are reasons that you prosecute individuals. They include specific deterrence, general deterrence, restitution, the society's need for retribution and justice. The policies that you wanted to talk about with regard to Larry Krasner, please tell us, do they further specific deterrence when he is letting people out on cashless bail?
Quite the opposite. Larry Krasner's policies have literally been a license to commit further crimes, further lawlessness, and further terrorize the citizens of Philadelphia. I couldn't help but note that your question about the health examiner walking into a restaurant and not prosecuting or enforcing a regulation that concerns the safety of its patrons. It's exactly what's going on with Larry Krasner. How do you let people walk into stores, steal hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise, oftentimes from a single owner bodega or that type of thing? How do you let them walk in, steal things, and walk out scot-free? It's lawlessness. It's craziness. And it is emboldening these criminals to be more and more violent and more aggressive against our citizenry. And I want to say, hopefully, help is on the way. We have a new mayor in Philadelphia. Her name is Sherelle Parker. She's extremely capable and street smart. And she's avowed not to put up with this kind of craziness. The problem is that she cannot control what Larry Krasner prosecutes or fails to prosecute. And unfortunately, no matter how much a mayor wants to pitch in, to the extent that we have a district attorney who issues memos to his line DAs, you will not prosecute this crime. We have it in writing. There are memos. It's an outrage.
So Mrs. And Dr. Fitzgerald, whoever wants to take this question, there are standards that govern the death penalty cases in Pennsylvania. And you present to those, if you file your petition requesting a death penalty, you present those aggravating factors to a jury. They're the ones that make the determination on death penalty. What has been the process that you've engaged in with regard to the death penalty application, and what is Mr. Krasner and his team, how have they responded to your efforts and the process you've gone through?
So in this process, sir, and thank you for the question, the office, after our petitioning the office to discuss with us what their intent was to do with, to pursue either the death penalty or not to, in our son's case, they invited us in to make our own case, basically.
Is that normal?
No, that's not normal. The first question that we asked the committee that he considered the Death Penalty Review Committee, which is used by many other district attorneys across not only this Commonwealth, but across the country. Having come from Philadelphia, been born and raised here, come up through the City of Philadelphia Police Department, we are aware that he has not used this process before. He has summarily dismissed the fact that he wanted to, or that he would ever pursue the death penalty. But in our case, we were afforded the opportunity, if you would put it that way, to present before this committee. We did so. We presented our own aggravators. We even attacked with the potential mitigators. Thankfully, my wife has worked homicides for years, both, I mean, just in the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office. She was a homicide investigator there. And being a chief of police and investigator, we were able to detach ourselves somewhat, if you will, from what happened with our son. But no family should ever have to lobby. No family should have to make it made to be felt as if we didn't do a good enough job before this committee, we wouldn't get justice. It's ridiculous. And I would submit again that one of the biggest impediments to criminal justice can be district attorneys. I spoke with Mr. Jordan earlier, and I talked about the preamble you had in your last report, and it talked about attorneys. It talked about attorneys being able to go after people and to get them, but they have that same ability to totally dismiss what the public wants and just go after what they want. And in this case, the clear want is to do away with the death penalty and to ensure that our son doesn't get justice.
Mr. Chairman, I have several unanimous consents, if I can present.
Gentlemen.
Yes. I present the certified copy of the fiscal year 2021 where the $33 million was removed from the police.
Without objection.
And then I have an article entitled Remembering Philadelphia Police Sergeant James O'Connor, killed in the line of duty 1 year ago, from Saturday, March 13, 2021.
Without objection.
And also an article entitled Make Sure Justice is Served, Slain Temple Police Sergeant's Family Calls for Death Penalty for Suspect, dated January 23, 2024.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald, thank you for sharing the story of your son's life and his service to the community. In addition to being a member of the Temple University Police Department, where he worked to keep college students and the university community safe, your son was also a father of 5 and an active member of Swagger House Run Club and Black Men Run Philadelphia, which both organize group runs through Philadelphia to raise awareness around gun violence. I appreciate your being here, and I offer you my deepest sympathies for your loss. I must say that the people of Philadelphia do not appear to share your opinion and that of Mr. Gerace and Mr. Bischetto of District Attorney Krasner since they reelected him. Mr. Garber, the civil suit against the teenager who shot and killed Sergeant Fitzgerald alleges that the killer suffered from mental instability, a propensity for violence, and a strong interest in possessing and using firearms. It also alleges that he showed signs again and again that he presented a high risk of harm to himself and others. Mr. Garber, how could the Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act, a federal red flag law, or HB 1018, a similar Pennsylvania measure, have prevented this shooter or others like him from accessing firearms, potentially saving the life of people like Sergeant Christopher Fitzgerald?
Thank you. Extreme risk protection orders are designed to help give family members who understand someone's in crisis or law enforcement an opportunity to temporarily remove the firearm. And because firearms are so fatal when used, as we've heard today, unfortunately, removing it gives us time to get the person to get help. And so there may be real evidence in that case that if extreme risk protection orders existed here in Pennsylvania, either through state or national law, that it could have prevented the shooting. It's also, though, worth noting that, as I understand it, the shooter, being under 21, could not purchase the firearm on his own, and I'm unaware of exactly where the firearm came from in these cases, and so we should also look at that question as well.
Mr. Garber, last Congress, under Democratic control, this committee led the passage of the federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act in the House. Last year, also under Democratic control, the Pennsylvania House passed their red flag law. Both bills passed their respective chambers with overwhelming support from Democrats and the support of some Republicans, but neither became law. What is your response to the lawmakers across the country who have voted against or criticized extreme risk protection orders?
I think these lawmakers are out of touch with their constituents, frankly. The only place gun safety laws like extreme risk protection orders are partisan is in the Capitol buildings. In Pennsylvania, over 80% of 80% of Pennsylvanians support red flag laws, and that includes people of all persuasions. It includes gun owners, it includes conservatives, self-identified conservatives, and Republicans. We need tools like this because when someone is in crisis, when they can get their hands on a gun, it puts everyone else at risk.
Mr. Garber, what does the research show about the rates of gun deaths in jurisdictions that have passed red flag laws?
The rates are lower when you have an extreme risk protection order and other gun safety laws on the books.
Thank you. Mr. Garber, are you aware of cases where people have spent 10, 20, 30 years in prison for crimes of which they were ultimately exonerated?
It's not, I'm sure that is the case, but I'm not aware of it. It's not something I study deeply.
Are you aware of the case in New York in which 5 black youths were convicted of raping a jogger in Central Park in 1989 and spent years in jail, and in which Mr. Trump, as he was then, demanded the death penalty, in which they were subsequently exonerated?
I'm familiar with that. I'm familiar with the generalities of the case.
Do you think that if death penalty laws give the risk of innocent people ever being executed?
Ceasefire PA doesn't have a position overall on the death penalty in these cases. We look at gun safety laws that can prevent the victims from being created in the first place.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Geraci, about a year ago, the governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, said that the divide in America today is normal versus crazy. You can go down the list of crazy policies the left now has, like it's crazy to have an open border.
Correct.
But in the context we're talking about today, some of the crazy policies, is it crazy to defund the police?
100%.
Crazy. It just makes no sense, right? Is it crazy not to say bad guys who violate the law should be prosecuted and let them go free? Is that crazy?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
When you have a district attorney who doesn't prosecute the bad guys.
Yes, that's crazy.
That's crazy,
yes.
Right?
Yep.
Not following the law. And here's the problem. Craziness has consequences. How short is the Philadelphia Police Department today in police officers?
So we just, I believe yesterday, got rid of our 6th police district which covered Center City. So now they combined with the 9th District because of lack of manpower. The 8th District is geographically gigantic. It could take from one corner to the other almost 20, 25 minutes, lights and sirens, meaning, pedestrians get out of the way, cars are supposed to pull over.
Is there a number? Is there a number short? Are you hundreds of officers short?
Thousands.
Thousands of officers short?
So in the 8th District, there'll be times where there's 2 radio cars and maybe a wagon to cover an area that's
so there's a consequence that you don't have enough police officers to do the job when you defund the police and you don't prosecute the bad guys.
Correct.
But the real consequences are what happened to the Fitzgerald family, to Marisa, who lost a husband, to Mrs. O'Connor, who lost. Those are the real consequences, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I thought Dr. Fitzgerald said something really insightful in his office. He said a lot of insightful things, but one of the things that stuck out to me was he said, criminals aren't stupid. They're just bad. They know the fact that you are thousands of officers short.
Absolutely.
They know that if they do something wrong, that this, what did you call him? Let him go, Larry?
That's correct. Let him go, Larry.
Let him go, Larry is going to let him go, right?
Yes.
They know all that because they're not stupid. They're just bad guys, and bad guys need to be prosecuted. And in order to catch the bad guys, you need officers on the street. And right now, Philadelphia is lacking in both. They don't have enough officers on the street, and they don't have a prosecutor who will go after the bad guys if the officers who are on the street can actually catch them.
Correct.
That's the situation.
Yes. Do you want the honest truth of what's going on?
Sure do.
Police officers are afraid to do their job because Krasner is looking to hang every one of them.
You got to the next point. The next point is, and if they go out there and do their job, they're afraid that the press is going to come after them, or maybe worse yet, Mr. Krasner, who was the officer that was your friend, one of your colleagues who you worked with in the police, who Mr. Krasner took to court. What was his name?
Joe Bologna.
Joe Bologna. Right?
Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that arrest. Yep.
And it goes back to what the good governor of Arkansas said. It's all craziness. It's just crazy to do it that way. I got 2 minutes left. I want to go to Dr. Fitzgerald because I knew you wanted to respond to something Mr. Nadler said, and then I want to yield any other time to our chairman of the crime committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to respond by saying the objective here is not to invalidate or validate, let's say, for our family's purposes, the death penalty. We will stand up and with anyone who's unfairly prosecuted and unfairly sentenced because of bad policing. What we have here is bad prosecutorial actions or inaction. We won't stand for that. So we have rules for a reason, laws for a reason. And when our district attorney selectively, if not even prejudicially, right, determines what it is that he will and will not prosecute, I go back to what you said, Mr. Chairman. Criminals aren't dumb. They're not stupid, referring to what I talked about earlier. They know that when they run into stores en masse in downtown Philadelphia or anywhere in this country, and they run out with hundreds of, or even thousands at times, of dollars worth of products, they will not be prosecuted. If we want to be honest, being honest means talking to real Philadelphians, getting on the street, doing what Mr. Krasner and his pundits said yesterday, just yesterday, and that's let's get some real statistics. Well, let's get some real statistics and see what real Philadelphians think.
Yield the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to ask, I think, Mr. Buchetta on this. When the district attorney doesn't prosecute, the public itself, we've talked about police, we've talked about specific victims of crime, but the public gets a malaise of hopelessness and helplessness. Do they continue to call police then when someone busts into their bodega and starts ripping them off?
You've put your finger right on the problem. The demoralization of the police department and the demoralization of the general public is stark. I want to give you one example, Congressman, that I think typifies this. I was involved in the Columbus statue litigation in Marconi Plaza in South Philadelphia. It's a beautiful little plaza and a park right on Broad Street. And I was sitting there with numerous Philadelphia police officers and a gang of 30 ATVs and dirt bikes and no mufflers came roaring down the street unmistakable. It was just as abrupt an interruption of a community's life as you can have. And I turned to the police officer and I said, didn't we used to prevent that kind of outrageous lawlessness on the streets? He said, yeah, we used to. Not anymore. You think I'm going to go arrest one of those folks and have Larry Krasner breathing down my neck? Yep. That is a direct example. I was right there. I was an eyewitness. And, Congressman, that is exactly what is demoralizing our community from the point of view of being able to rely on the government to keep safety alive.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would have been delighted to welcome the Judiciary Committee to Philadelphia for a thoughtful and honest discussion about how violent crime has dramatically declined in Philadelphia in recent years, the challenges our city continues to face, and how the federal government can help. But that's not what's happening here today. Chairman Jordan has not convened the House Judiciary Committee in the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection to explore how Congress can help to reduce violent crime in Philadelphia or anywhere else. Instead, he's brought his traveling circus to town in order to divide Americans, scare voters, influence elections, and distract from the crushing failure of the House majority to govern in this Congress. Chairman Jordan wants to convince people that gun violence is a Philadelphia problem, but the truth is gun violence is an American problem that is traumatizing families in every corner of every community across this great land. So let's start by making three things clear. One, contrary to the statistics cited by the chairman, violent crime in Philadelphia has decreased dramatically in recent years. Two, our entire country continues to face a daily epidemic of gun violence. Three, that senseless violence is not inevitable. It's enabled by lawmakers who choose to sow chaos with political stunts like this hearing instead of doing their damn jobs. What makes today's sham hearing even more offensive is that while our Republican colleagues are trying to score political points here off the pain of families who have suffered grievous losses, they're simultaneously blocking votes on bills that would prevent gun violence in Philadelphia and across the country by keeping weapons out of dangerous hands and off our neighborhood streets. We all know too many people who've been scarred by gun violence, who've lost loved ones, neighbors, and friends, and who are crying out for action to address this public health crisis. But our Republican colleagues are deaf to those cries. We're seeing work on the ground across the Philadelphia region that offers hope. New violence intervention programs are showing progress. Homicides in Philadelphia this year to date are down by 35% from last year and down 16% from 5 years ago. Police statistics show that violent crime is at its lowest levels here in more than 2 decades. But there is still so much more work to do. Americans are demanding action, and American voters, our children, deserve to know where their representatives stand on the common sense solutions to stop this carnage. Democrats have introduced bills that would close background check loopholes, that would implement red flag laws, promote the safe storage of firearms, and ban assault weapons and ghost guns. But our colleagues refuse to join us in demanding votes on those bills. Philadelphians and all Americans deserve a Congress that does its job and passes legislative solutions, not a Congress that spends all its time mired in political sideshows and dysfunction. Our country has serious issues that demand serious solutions, not cynical political circuses like this hearing. Philadelphia deserves better, and America deserves better. Now, I have a direct stake in this subject. 2.5 years ago, I was carjacked at gunpoint by 3 teenagers using a firearm they brought from out of state. Obviously, it was scary to have a gun pointed at my chest. But as I looked down the barrel of that gun, my mind raced, thinking about all the ways Congress could have prevented that encounter by closing loopholes to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, including kids, by giving ATF the funding that it needs to enforce gun trafficking laws, and by addressing the poverty, trauma, and social conditions that led those kids to pick up a gun in the first place. It also occurred to me that the gun pointed at my chest could have been a ghost gun, and I heard a snicker. Yes, your mind does race in funny ways when you are facing a gun. So, Mr. Garber, could you talk about how ghost guns, these untraceable, unregulated firearms that can be bought and sold without a background check, contribute to gun violence here in Philadelphia, and why we need legislation to address this threat?
We saw a 410% increase in the recovered number of ghost guns just in Philadelphia. And the thing is, when we're talking about people with criminal records, they may not be able to walk into a licensed dealer and buy a gun, but they can order a ghost gun kit online and in this a little amount of time have a gun in their home that they can use in these violent crimes. So it is a massive gap in our safety system that we have to close.
And Pennsylvania recently passed bipartisan legislation through one house to address this issue, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Dr. Abaya, you work with young people here in Philadelphia. Can you talk about why it's important to address the toll of gun violence with our youth?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we know about gun violence is that the trauma that's sustained early in life has implications for the duration of life. We also know that, as I had mentioned in my testimony, when gun violence occurs, those who are in immediate proximity have long-term mental health needs, and that trauma in and of itself can contribute to future involvement in and exposure to violence. And so it's a very important preventative measure to identify and intervene upon violence for youth. And that's violence within a community. So not just the individual, but the community in which they live.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I see my time has expired, although not by as much as some of our other members, so I will yield back.
I'm trying to be lenient. The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
When Philadelphia was coined the city of brotherly love, I don't think Cain and Abel were the brothers they were referring to. But it seems, if you look at the major crimes in this fair city, they're increasing. The latest Pew report indicates that the number of major crimes, which is the combined tally of violent crime and property crime, has now reached a 20-year high. I was deeply moved by the testimony of Ms. O'Connor, Ms. Fitzgerald, and Dr. Fitzgerald, and I was stricken and a bit insulted that my previous colleague made mention of this as a circus, as you're here to hopefully lend greater understanding to policymakers about how to make death and violence less likely. Ms. Fitzgerald, your testimony almost brought Mr. Biggs and I to tears. We are sympathetic criers. But what was it like hearing Ms. Scanlon describe this as a circus?
We certainly aren't circus animals. We are people. I'm born and raised in this city. My entire family is here, and this city is suffering.
How did you feel, Dr. Fitzgerald?
We just met this morning, Ms. Scanlon. However, and with all due respect, we aren't circus animals. My wife, my daughter-in-law that are here because we've suffered tremendous pain, as you suffered when you were carjacked. I remember reading that article. So I keep very much in tune with what's going on here in the city. We have generations of Fitzgeralds, Marreros, that give back to this city. Her brother-in-law commutes back and forth from the county into the city to the poorest section of this city to give out food to, I'm sorry, your brother, excuse me. But my point being, we have a vested interest in care, and we wouldn't be used as circus animals. We're telling a story, and we're smart enough to be intent enough to communicate properly and share what we feel and what our family feels. Again, we didn't move here. We were born and raised here. We still have tremendous connections with this city, so we get feedback. And it goes back to...
Well, Dr. Fitzgerald, if you don't mind,
yes,
I want to zero in because I was looking at really the election contest for Mr. Krasner, who everyone here, or most folks here, seem to have some objection with, and he won overwhelmingly. And he said in his victory speech, in Philadelphia, this is a movement that has been led by black, and brown and broke people and progressives. And if you're black or brown or broke, you better be progressive because there isn't much of an alternative. It seems to me that living would be an alternative, right?
Living is an alternative that is the reality for folks that live in communities like I grew up in West Philadelphia or in East Division where my wife grew up. These are the neighborhoods that are the poorest. These are the neighborhoods that have most of the gun violence within the city, and these are the ones that no one surveys, that no one talks to, that perhaps one or two representatives from those ends of the communities speak, and they don't necessarily speak for the people on the ground.
Well, I also want to zoom out a little bit, because Mr. Krasner made a remarkable admission in his election victory speech. He said, this is about a movement of progressive prosecutors who have taken office around the country. It is not about us as individuals. So, Ms. O'Connor, I wanted to give you a chance to react to that this dynamic, this soft on crime progressivism, it's not just an isolated circumstance in one area, but the DAs who are doing these policies, they actually see themselves as part of a broader movement to impact the whole country this way. What's your reaction to that?
I'm going to try to keep it nice. I think people are delusional. There is no one here in this room that can come at me with any of the facts about Jim's job. These guys are all lengthy past criminals. How can somebody not understand what's going on, that these men, my husband could still be here today if these men were prosecuted the way they should have been and been behind bars over multiple, these guys have combined 8 to 10 murders underneath of them. It's insane. They have been let out and they know this. These are not, when people are killed in Philadelphia, people just can't wait to see the rap sheet of the person that did the shooting and how many times they have been let out. It is ridiculous. My son is a police officer. He has locked someone up who laughed in his face and said, I will be out in a few hours. He was right. And our district attorney, oh my God, my son was in the police academy and this man came up to him as he was standing around the hero wall. And he said, how you doing there, sir? And my son looked at him like, are you crazy? He said, how am I doing? That's my father on the wall right there. And Larry couldn't even look at him and just turned away. Like, it is, the policy is, everything is totally out of control. And people that respect this man or want to vote for him, let it happen to your family, and then you'll see how you'll feel about everybody walking free and what goes on in this city. I see what the police officers go through. They are scared to do their job. You have nobody going into the academy. Why would they? He is looking to prosecute the police more than keep people in jail where they should be. It's ridiculous.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired, but I just wanted to thank all of the witnesses and certainly express my appreciation for the hearing and my understanding that this is no circus. This is a very serious endeavor that is life or death, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman goes back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield Ms. Scanlon a bit of time, and then I'll get to my questions.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify for our witnesses, and of course Mr. Gates knows better, that I was not referring to the witnesses whose pain is very real, and we really appreciate their testimony here and their efforts to try to make the city a better place. I was referring to the actions of our colleagues as being circus-like and of trading on the pain of other people. So thank you, Ms. Dean. I yield back to you.
Thank you. It seems to me that we have two hearings going on here. And what you have suffered, the folks in this room, the O'Connor family, the Fitzgerald family, there is nothing we can say that will heal your pain, and we know that. But I hope you know that as serious legislators, as somebody who has wanted to do something about gun violence when I was a professor at LaSalle University, when I was a young mother to 3 children, taking my kids to the Million Mom March 24 years ago. Some of us are very serious and intentional about wanting to do something, and so you might see some frustration in us. This very committee held a hearing to defund the ATF. Is that the right direction for this country to go? To defund an important law enforcement agency that helps trace back where these criminals are getting the guns. That's why it's a little frustrating here. So again, your losses, we feel very, very deeply. I can't imagine. As a professor at LaSalle University, as I said, I wasn't elected to anything. I had an adult woman in my night class who talked a lot. We'd meet in conference about her writing. We talked a lot about her precious 15-year-old sons, twins. And then the next semester, I read in the newspaper of one of the 16-year-olds being shot and killed based on a gripe, some gripe among 16-year-olds with guns. Let's get serious about how do we get these guns out of people's hands. As federal legislators, what can we do to make a difference, to get illegal guns off the street, to get guns out of the hands of folks who are prohibited purchasers because they're unsafe, they're unwell? Let's get serious about that. So, Dr. Abaya, I want to start with you. You have recited what we know to be an extraordinarily shameful American statistic. Children in this country are more likely to die of gun violence than any other cause. I don't know another nation that wears that badge of shame. That's the United States. That's not just Philadelphia, folks. That's the United States. You're in the trenches. You're dealing with families who are dealing with these incredible losses. What are the most effective things we can do? And you have cited the statistics. In Philadelphia, unlike what some of my colleagues said, crime down 38.28%, homicide, rape down 22%. But let's just stick with the gun violence. What are the effective things going on in this city, regardless of the Krasner argument that's going on? What's going on that's effective and is bringing down this rate?
Thank you so much for that question. So a public health approach to addressing this issue really consists of identifying modifiable risk factors in community. This is something that's worked with a myriad of diseases that have had successful public health interventions over the years. What are the modifiable risk factors that can be intervened upon within community? These start with the individual, but also involve the entire community, even the built environment. And right here in Philadelphia, some of the most seminal studies have been done that demonstrate the impact of these strategies. So I mentioned CVI. These are strategies that identify people who are at highest risk of near-term violence with an aggressive case management plan. These people are engaged by someone that they trust, someone who can pull them from the cycle of violence for a period of a minimum of months. This is not a short-term engagement. It's not a Band-Aid. It's a way to significantly alter a person's life course forever. What we really want for community safety is for people to not enter into violent situations and then be withdrawn and then enter and withdrawn. We've seen that in our homicide review cases when I was at the health department. We saw those cycles of continued exposure, repeat injury over and over again. Interventions that intervene when we recognize those modifiable risk factors and transform them, address them sustainably by providing, for example, employment where someone has an actual place to go day to day, cognitive behavioral therapy and other types of mental health interventions. Those strategies are known to be effective. There are other things that have been studied in the city of Philadelphia, such as changes to the built environment, as I mentioned, greening, which had a measurable impact on reducing violence in the areas that were transformed. This is community transformation that has impacts actually beyond gun violence. So I think that the thread of hope here is that there are interventions that are proven. There's promising research being conducted every day, and there's a lot to invest in that could really change lives.
Thank you for your work on this. What is a public health crisis? We have another public health crisis going on, which is addiction. And so I invite the chairman to please come. Take a look at what is going on in Kensington if you want to be serious about doing anything around addiction and mental health. And I'll end with Mr. Garber. That's a public health approach. What have you been doing at the state level that's been successful with the Democratic House that we should take to the federal level?
I think we've found ways to find common ground. Right now, we're really focused on firearm trafficking, especially. I was talking to a detective in Montgomery County yesterday about how lapses and slowness in the electronic records of sale system, which is our state public background check system, is impacting their ability to identify traffickers before someone loses their life. And so we're working with Republicans and Democrats on legislation to address that. And already in the last year, we've had 3 bills, the Extremist Protection Order bill, ghost gun ban, and a universal background check bill. And the background check bill is really important for Congress to look at, because in Pennsylvania, while we have an extremely strong state-based background check law, that we see guns travel up from my home state of Georgia, from the south, up the iron pipeline, right into Philadelphia, and cause this violence.
I thank you, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back. Excuse me. I do have a unanimous request.
Recognize.
Consent. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the Philadelphia Police Department Major Crimes Report citywide 2024 because I really want to correct the record. Mr. Gates had statistics from some other era. So I ask unanimous consent to put this in to show that homicide is down 38.28%.
Without objection, gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, can I be recognized for unanimous consent?
Sure.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the 2023 Pew report that indicated that major crimes were to a 20-year high, which combines violent crime and property crime.
Without objection. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, if we're doing unanimous consent, I have a couple as well.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
There's a January 18th, 2024 article from the Philadelphia Inquirer by the Director of the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform entitled, How Philadelphia Reduced Gun Violence in 2023.
Without objection.
Also, an April 30th article from NBC 10 Philadelphia titled, Philly Leaders Encouraged by Drop in Homicides So Far This Year.
Objection.
Also, an April 12th article from Fox 29 Philadelphia titled, Carjacking Significantly Declined in 2 Years, Philadelphia Carjacking Task Force Reports.
Without objection.
And an April 15th article from WHYY titled, Philly DA Sets Up New Unit Focusing on Repeat Gun Offenders.
Without objection.
Also, an April 16th article from Axios titled, Number of Homicides Plummets in Major U.S. Cities, noting that Philadelphia currently is experiencing a 37% decline in murders.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you. I yield back.
This will be my last, Mr. Chairman. I have an additional unanimous consent request.
Gentleman is recognized.
George Soros prosecutors wage war on law and order at heritage.org.
Without objection.
Philadelphia's Soros-funded district attorney deceived court to get murderer off death row from the Washington Examiner.
Without objection.
George Soros' bad bet on progressive DAs from the Philadelphia Citizen.
Without objection. While we're keeping Mr. Klein waiting, you all have been here for a couple hours. If you need a break, just let us know. We can certainly give you a chance for a break.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I just want to say that with all the anti-Semitism we're seeing the anti-Semitism of using George Soros again. It's disgusting.
Point of privilege, Mr. Ranking Member, not every criticism of George Soros is anti-Semitic. The criticisms deal with public policy and the matters of rising crime with DAs. I don't know anything about Mr. Soros' faith. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses, in particular the Fitzgeralds and Mrs. O'Connor, for being here. Your stories are tragic, and we share your grief. I love the city of Philadelphia. I love to come here and visit. The history is amazing, and my kids love it. We came up here and got to tour around. We tried to go to a pizza place up in Callow Hill, crossed under the convention center, and that was a wrong turn because we saw some tragic individuals underneath that tunnel, and we want to come back here. I told my kids I was coming up here for a hearing, and they looked and said, Daddy, don't go back to the convention center, because they remember what they saw here. So there is greatness in your city, but there's also crisis in your city. And the crisis comes as a result of the budget that Mr. Biggs put in the record, which in 2021, I'm just going to read it. To address fiscal challenges and issues with equity in law enforcement, the Philadelphia Police Department's budget was reduced by $33 million. That had a real impact. When Chairman Jordan asked how short on officers are they, well, I got on Google, and it says in a force of 6,500, at the beginning of this year, they were short about 1,000. And over 100 retired on January 1st of this year. Over the next 2 years, another 600 are scheduled to retire. There is a crisis in confidence among law enforcement, and that is having a real impact on crime in Philadelphia. Over the last year, property crimes, including retail theft and carjackings, have risen by more than 15%. Retail theft has increased by almost 28%, while vehicle theft has skyrocketed by 72%. And that comes from this district attorney that refuses to prosecute. Mrs. O'Connor, I wanted to ask you in particular about when you mentioned in your testimony about the 4 men involved in your husband's shooting. At least 2 had prior convictions for violent crimes, including murder, and at least 2 had lenient sentences and were out on bail or parole. Can you just go into detail a little bit on that and what that does to crime in the city?
It's, again, I wish I had the time to go through and pull up all 4 of their prior arrests. It's, these guys were, there was 1 over 21, the rest were under 19, 18 years old. And just the amount of, I guess it starts with the gun charges that they were arrested for. And to be let out on that, well, why? You know, you commit a crime, you should be in jail, you should stay there. And to be let out, and then to find out, like I said, the main shooter, 5 names he wrote on that wall in prison cell, proudly, very proudly. I mean, 19 years old. It doesn't make any, at the time of the case, my daughter was 19. I'm like, this woman's in the Air Force trying to get her, you know, life together and figure it out. Or she could have sat home and just shot people and sold drugs and, you know, and got away with it for how many years? It didn't, this just didn't need to happen, and it's continuing to happen. And, you know, the low bail is what brings people out. This is why I said federally, thank God that this job is not in Larry Krasner's hands. I would totally believe that at least 1 to 2, maybe 3 of them would be out by now. And it's just, and there's so much, the crime is just out of control. And I get really emotional talking about it because Jim should still be here.
It is, and he should still be here. And in fact, they're trying to take more away from Mr. Krasno. I'm noticing that the governor just signed Act 40 into law in the final months last year to allow the state's attorney general to appoint a special prosecutor on any crime that occurs within 500 yards of a SEPTA property in Philadelphia. It allows the special prosecutor to intervene in all such cases through 2026, which is when Krasner's current term would end. So hopefully they're going to be able to take more away from Krasner so that he won't be able to dismiss and ignore the crimes that are occurring across this city. Mr. Pichetto, in my final seconds, I wanted to ask you about the attempted impeachment of Mr. Krasno. He was successfully impeached in the House, and then he sued to block it, the trial in the Senate. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
And can you talk about the effort that you undertook and how it seems that it was thrown out by a single judge, and what that does to Mr. Krasner's, I don't know, willingness, as it were? Is he just going to be encouraged by that to continue to try and ignore more crime in the city?
I think he is, and, you know, it was even worse than that. What happened was in the September-October terms of the 2022 House Republicans impeached Larry Krasner. And just like in the federal model, in the state model here in Pennsylvania, from there it goes to a trial in the Senate. Unfortunately, the House changed control in the November 2022 elections, and they lost 13 sitting Republicans, converted to Democratic control. And as soon as that happened, they fired the House manager of the impeachment process, who had engaged me. So we were essentially shut down by politics and never had the chance to really present the case to the Senate. And then, as you point out, thereafter, Mr. Krasner presented a petition to a Democratic judge who, in I believe a partisan way, interrupted the process. And the impeachment is now in mothballs. But, you know, I wish to point out one of the biggest issues in the Krasner impeachment has nothing to do with whether crime is rising or crime is going down or that type of thing. It's the manner in which he disregards victims of crime. Victims have state and federal rights. And most recently, Larry Krasner was held in contempt of court in federal proceedings where he directly lied to the court about consulting with victim crime families in implementing reductions in sentences. It was a direct lie. He was called out on it. It was confirmed in the Third Circuit. It's an act of misconduct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to just thank all of the witnesses for being here. I was born in Philadelphia. My father, his entire family's from Philadelphia, and so every time I come back, it has a special place in my heart. And I do believe that every single one of you here wants Philadelphia to be the best that it possibly can be. And so I'm going to focus my questions on things that might help prevent violent crimes from occurring. I represent Wake County, North Carolina, and this is a place that's home to both metropolitan centers like downtown Raleigh and smaller, much more rural towns. Yet each part of my district represents the challenges that we've heard today, though not with our district attorney. But what we've seen is that violence isn't segregated to large cities or democratic areas. Today we have violence because it's easier than ever to access a firearm and to access it illegally. I call my sheriff, I only have one sheriff because I only represent one county, but I have 10 chiefs of police. I call them every 4 to 6 weeks just to check in. The two things they tell me every single time: number one, too much access to illegal firearms. It threatens the communities and it threatens their own officers. The second thing is how difficult it is to recruit officers. It's easier in some of the small towns because the cost of living is lower and you just know everybody. But particularly in Raleigh, it's very difficult to recruit officers. And so I've been working on that, in particular trying to recruit all different kinds of officers and more female officers, because they tend to be better at some of the de-escalation that we need to see when they confront the community. But I want to share a recent example from a suburban neighborhood in my district, Hedingham. In October of 2022, Hedingham experienced a mass shooting. The shooter was a 15-year-old who took a firearm that he used to kill 5 people from his family home, and it was left unsecured. In North Carolina, guns are now the leading cause of injury or death for children, surpassing car accidents. And one of the reasons for this tragedy is the lack of safe storage. Same all across the country. 42% of the households in my state own firearms, legally own firearms. But half of those households do not have safe storage. Nationally, 70% of school shootings are committed by children who have had unsecured guns in their home. 75% of unintentional shootings of children are committed with unsecured guns, and 80% of firearm suicides by children involve family weapons. In addition, thousands of unsecured guns are reported stolen in North Carolina and across the country, threatening not only their families, but the communities where these guns end up proliferating. My first question is for Dr. Abaya. How does safe storage factor into community violence intervention programs?
Thank you for that question. So safe storage is incredibly important in any community violence intervention structure or ecosystem. Specifically, when it comes to children, we know that there's no circumstance under which a child should have access to a gun. So safe storage is a kind of fundamental component of anticipatory guidance for pediatricians who are engaging with children. There's great evidence that safe storage prevents accidental injuries, as you identified, suicides. And I think that there is untapped promise for community violence, the unique nature of interpersonal violence that we see on the streets. Because as you mentioned, unsecured guns can end up causing violence in a myriad of ways. Safe storage has been shown to be most impactful if you link education with device provision. And so programs like the one at Shop that help families by both giving them the information they need to keep their children safe and providing them with information about a specific device have been shown to be most effective. And there's also evidence that families are receptive to this messaging, especially when it comes from trusted voices like their primary care provider. So there's a lot of potential to increase safe storage, specifically in protecting children.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask the Fitzgeralds a question. And I am so devastated by the story of what happened to your son. And I hope that you get the justice that you're seeking. But I want to talk about safe storage in that context because, as Mr. Nadler described, the person who killed your son in such a heinous, violent, and cruel way had known mental health problems. Well, at least from the record, it seemed like, but also had a family that allowed him to have access to these guns. And so we can let you talk about his mental health problems, but his family let him have access to these guns when he was under the age of 21. Do you think that safe storage or some way of dealing with that could have been helpful in your situation?
So I'll answer that question. Yes, I do believe his family gave him access to guns. As far as the mental health, I have to say that during his preliminary, he said that he did not have any mental health history. So I don't know where that statement is coming from. But yes, I do feel that he had access to guns, and I do feel that his family gave him that access to them. He was underage. He was under the age to legally have a gun. And so, yes, I don't believe they locked him up. I believe they shot on their property. I believe he target shot, and yes, he has pictures on the internet with all kinds of guns.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a UC.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to put in a Pew Trust report which indicates that my home state, my home community, Phoenix, one of the highest per capita gun ownerships in the nation, constitutional carry, has one of the lowest homicide rates, 8 per 100,000, which is 3.5 times less than Philadelphia, and ask that to.
Without objection. Thank you. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Dr. Fitzgerald, Mrs. Fitzgerald, Ms. O'Connor, I'm sorry you have to be here, and I mean that. And you're here for a specific purpose. And I don't want us to lose what the focus of this hearing is, and we have to keep our eye on the ball. You know, politics is a nasty business sometimes, and sometimes when folks are in a corner, they want to talk about everything over here, the shiny object over here. But we really need to talk about what's happening in Philadelphia, and we need to talk about the policies in Philadelphia with this prosecutor. That's what we're here for. And I got to tell you, I live at the Jersey Shore. My district is the New Jersey Shore. I'm sure you're familiar with it. In the summertime, actually for about 5 months of the year, we're more Philadelphia and eastern Pennsylvania than we are New Jersey. We're outnumbered. And God help you if you're a Yankee fan or a Knicks fan, you're in big trouble. I talked to a lot of law enforcement. A lot of law enforcement come down to whether it's Sea Isle City, Stone Harbor, Avalon, et cetera, Cape May. And they all say the same thing. They are afraid to do their job in Philadelphia. That's the issue we're talking about today. That's why we're here. I talk to people who live in Philly, that love Philly. It's in their blood, multiple generations, and they are scared. And they are not only, let me just, the 1,000-pound elephant or whatever. They're not all white. They're white, they're black, they're Hispanic, they're Asian. They're all afraid because violence is, we're all afraid of it, and we all deserve to live in a safe home, in a safe neighborhood with police that can do their job. And you know, we're talking about the death penalty and Donald Trump and ghost guns and George Soros and anti-Semitism. No, George Soros, the issue is he purposely and willfully has made it a goal of his to liberalize and change prosecutors throughout the United States of America, including Philadelphia, and is directly involved. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. We talk about political agendas, safe storage. That's not the issue today. They're important issues. Some of them are. Some of them, quite frankly, aren't, but some of them are. It's not the issue. You know what the issue today is? It's enforcing the law. It's against the law to rape. It's against the law to murder. It's against the law to beat people to death. It's against the law to distribute drugs. It's against the law to carjack. It's against the law to steal it. But we are not enforcing the law in the city of Philadelphia and in many other locations in the United States of America. And we can talk about all these other issues that people are bringing up today, but that's the issue that we're here for. Larry Krasner. I'm sorry, I'm going to say it because, you know, I'm a blunt guy. I'm not an attorney, I'm a dentist. And we just say it right out there. He's a bad guy. He's doing bad things. Larry Krasner, cops are in danger because of what he does. Larry Krasner, and I hate to say it this way, I don't know how else to say it though. Your son, your husband, isn't here because of his policies. It's common sense. How can you keep leaving people out over and over and over again when they've killed and raped and stolen and hurt others? It doesn't make sense. It's wrong. All those other issues are important, but this is what we're here for. It has to stop. That's why we're having that hearing. I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it. The problem was created by politicians. And so now I guess politicians, we got to try to straighten it out. But this is a created problem that didn't need to happen, and it shouldn't happen. And God help you. I feel so bad for you having to sit here through all this stuff and hear it all. I know your hearts are broken, and there's no words. You know, nobody can say we know how you feel. I don't know how you feel. I didn't lose my spouse. I didn't lose my son, so I don't know how you feel. I can only imagine it. Ms. O'Connor, can you tell quickly the impact of lenient sentencing and bail policies on your tragedy? Specifically, was it those policies that caused this to happen to you?
Yes, I've said it.
Thank you.
I'll say it again. My husband should still be here.
What measures do you believe need to be enacted to make this better? I think you know the answer to that.
People need to be locked up and kept in jail. These males had 10 guns in the room when that shooting happened. 10.
And they're released.
And they have been released.
Talk
It
about
is
gun storage,
ridiculous.
Damn it, they're bad people. Let's face it, we got to understand something in this world. There are good people and bad people. There are some bad people. Bad people need to be in jail, sometimes for the rest of their lives. So they can't do this to good people like you. Dr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald, what would you do right now if this was your world and you could change it and you could make it right today? If you were the supreme power, what would you do to change this? I know it's a hard question. The doc gave it to you.
I'll answer as well.
We'd start enforcing the law again.
Right.
There are laws for a reason. There's lawlessness in this city.
Enforce the damn law.
Victims
This isn't
are afraid.
complicated.
Yes.
We're trying to make it complicated, but it's not. Enforce the law. Bad people should be in jail. These are real bad people. I'm sorry to interrupt. Doctor.
I just have to tell you, this committee believes in justice, right? Part of what we have to do is start making sure that the folks responsible for facilitating justice for families like ours, and God, I just can't imagine what you've gone through as well. We've talked, but it weighs heavy on my heart. But Mr. Bucchetto got it right. He attempted to enforce ethics upon a district attorney who lacks them. Just a day ago, we were getting off a plane coming from San Antonio, Texas, and we saw a press conference. I'm sorry, we saw a presser with Mr. Krasner and Steve Keeley, a local reporter. And Mr. Krasner indicated that he was not aware of this committee meeting until 2 days ago. He said a day ago, but that would have been 2 days ago. That is patently false. And I would ask this committee to investigate that.
He should be here. He should man up and be here.
I agree with you, but I think that we have to be really intentional about what we're saying here. And this is, we have a district attorney in one of the largest major cities in the country who on television yesterday said he never knew about this meeting, right? My wife and I, on the 24th of last month, were in his presence with my daughter-in-law and about 10 of his people in his office doing the presentation that we told you about. And during the presentation, we informed him of this meeting. And we gave him a hard copy to reinforce it. And thankfully, I sent it to a few other people, so I had a record. So I'd ask this committee, if we believe in justice, to call the person responsible for ensuring that people in this city get justice on the carpet. He should be before you, or summoned before you now, and answer why he would go on television and tell the community here that he's supposed to serve, for the victims here he's supposed to serve, that lie. I can't understand how we can confuse it. We can't write it any other way. He did it, and he needs to be held accountable for it. We can prove it.
The guy who is district attorney went on television and told the community that he represents, that he's supposed to serve, that he didn't know about this hearing, but you had told him specifically about it 2 weeks prior to him making that statement.
That is correct.
That's your testimony, Doctor?
That is our testimony.
All right,
I'll let my wife answer as well, but please.
I appreciate you sharing that with the committee. That's important information that I think, frankly, Philadelphians need to know. And to this point that Mr. Gates and others have brought up about this effort to elect those kind of individuals to the district attorney's position, need to know about as well. Gentleman yields back. Appreciate that. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've only got 5 minutes, but I do want to pursue this issue about whether Mr. Krasner was invited or not. But we can come back to that in a moment. My understanding was that he was not, but we should.
Invited. That wasn't what. That wasn't what.
I'm not saying, but just for my 5 minutes,
we didn't
I want to
invite him,
stick
but you
with
guys
that.
could have if you wanted to.
I just wanted to know if you did or not.
No, we didn't.
Okay. Let me say this: there's sort of two hearings going on at once here, and I want to be very respectful, actually, of both. On the one hand, for the Fitzgeralds and the O'Connors, and I want to come back to you in a minute. I'm a former prosecutor at the federal level in Washington, D.C., and at the local level in Prince George's County, Maryland, and I had to handle cases like this, almost exactly like both of those. So I want to talk with you about it. It might make sense to do it offline, but it's a conversation I'd ask to have with you. There's also a lot of numbers flying around right now, too, and I'm not from Philadelphia. I just came up for the hearing, so I'm having trouble piecing them together. So I looked up last night. It says homicides during Krasner's tenure, and I noted that the chairman said in his opening comments that, they peaked in 2021, and that was at 562. They went down in 2022 to 514, and then this past year, 2023, they went down to 410. Now, I also noted when I looked up the election results, he was elected in 2021, with 71.8% of the vote. So I'm having trouble sort of squaring the two together, that he got that, well, I can come to you later, but, you know, how he got that much support. And I guess there's more, you know, there's another election coming up. And I guess we can see how it fares at that point. But I did want to raise this issue, too. As I mentioned, I was a prosecutor. I started in 1990 in D.C. during the height of the crack wars. And the local DA here was a guy named Ron Castile, I guess. In 1989, the homicides were 476. In 1990, they were 500. And I guess he left. That's his ghost turning the lights down? I don't know. I guess he left in 1991 to run for mayor, and he lost that race. But I did want to kind of note that those two numbers, 476 and 500, were significantly higher, actually, certainly than Krasner's in 2023 from 410. Now, normally at a hearing like this, one of the things I would like to do is figure out why that's the case. You know, what was happening in 89, what was happening in 90, what's happening now. And then we would try and put together legislative priorities to figure out how to continue to bring the numbers down in Philadelphia and across the country. But that's not what we're doing today. And the chairman mentions, you know, crazy things about policies, focused primarily on Philadelphia, but I got to note a couple too. Ghost guns, which was referenced a few minutes ago. There's legislation in Congress to ban ghost guns, and there's no serious argument for having them available. They don't have serial numbers. The only reason is so they can avoid criminal prosecution. There are 0 Republican sponsors for that bill. I think it's 150 plus or something on the Democratic side. I've got a bill called Raise the Age, which would lift it from 18 to 21 for you to be old enough to buy an assault weapon. And I didn't think that would be controversial because current federal law already is you've got to be 21 to buy a handgun. I have 0 Republican co-sponsors for that bill. We're well over 100. Defund the police, which has been raised repeatedly by my colleagues. But I've got to note that I've got at least one colleague on this panel who's got a bill to defund the FBI and another one who's got a bill to defund the ATF. So, Ms. O'Connor, I'm glad your case is being handled in the federal court, but if that bill were to pass, they wouldn't have the apparatus to do it. So, you know, I think it's important for us to try and figure out how to continue to address these problems, and they're not easy to address. They're very challenging in a lot of ways. And I don't think it's fully partisan either. When I was walking here from the hotel, I passed a billboard in the next block down, and it was by J.P. Chase, not exactly a liberal bastion. But they're trying to find, they're proposing efforts at reentry, trying to help people who are coming out of jail to get back integrated into the community and find jobs. And I think that's important. In fact, I started reentry programs when I was a local prosecutor because 99.999% of the people who go to jail, even for murder and rape, are going to come out eventually, even if they get convicted in federal court. So we should try and find ways to help get them back on the right track. And the Koch brothers, not a group I typically praise. In fact, this might be the first time I've ever said anything positive about the Koch brothers in public. But I'll say this, they do recognize that we have to try and find ways to address these criminal justice issues in a bipartisan way. And sort of the partisan back and forth in a forum like this really doesn't get there. So I'm over my time, maybe not as much as some of the others, but I want to renew this request. You all don't know about this, but this is my 4th time doing it before this committee, for us to try and get to a point where we can move forward with bipartisan legislation, bipartisan efforts to address policies that can make a difference. Some of them are going to be conservative. Some of them will involve keeping more people in jail for longer periods of time. Some of them won't. Some of them might also involve dealing with the fact that we have 400 million guns in the United States. That's like more than one for any person in the United States. And young people in my community and across the country have far too easy access to getting them. And as we saw in Michigan, and apparently in your case as well, parents who are not willing to step up and keep them under control and keep them away from those guns. So look, I thank you all for being here, Ms. O'Connor, the Fitzgeralds in particular, because this is a weight you're going to have to carry for the rest of your lives, and you're doing an outstanding job with it based on what I've seen today. And I encourage you to do it because it's important to keep the pressure on. Beyond Larry Krasner, folks like the House Judiciary Committee, who can do bigger things than we're doing today to try and address the issues that you've raised. Thank you for what you're doing, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I appreciate the gentleman. The gentleman yields back, and I would just say to the gentleman's request for bipartisanship, we did that 2 days ago. Your bill.
Oh, can I mention that? Can I mention that? Recruit and retain. So we passed a bill 2 days ago.
Gentleman's recognized again.
Thank you. So I co-sponsored it with a Republican from Texas. And we just thought the bill would fly through. But one of my Republican colleagues actually objected to the bill. In fact, it was more than it was two. So we end up with a voice vote. But this is a bill to get more police officers, to find ways to get more police officers to join and to keep them around.
Let the record show the chairman did not object. I've supported the legislation.
I thank the chairman for that. I really do. But it's an example of the automatic sort of going to corners, going to talking points, instead of finding a way to work together.
I think that bill will be on the floor in a couple weeks and will likely pass the House of Representatives, which is what I think the gentleman from Maryland would like to see. Appreciate the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman who came the farthest, the gentleman from California, is recognized.
There are two sights that we should never see in this country, but have become all too familiar in places like this. The first is open-air drug markets. The second is stores that have to put basic merchandise under lock and key, not just jewelry or expensive electronics, but gardening supplies at Home Depot, soap and shampoo at CVS. These conditions make people feel unsafe, they degrade the quality of life, and they fuel still greater criminal activity. And yet, these conditions do not exist uniformly across the country. Rather, they are concentrated in jurisdictions like this one. They are the product of conscious political choices. So, Mr. Grace, as one example, could you tell us about the Kensington neighborhood here in Philadelphia, the open-air drug market there, and the political choices that have ushered in that reality?
Get your microphone there.
Happy you asked this question. So this, again, points directly to Larry Krasner. The 24th Police District was a district I was at for 12 years. It's Kensington, Allegheny. In the media, it's known as the Kensington Beach. You see videos of it. In fact, this is a very embarrassing. Mexico used video from Kensington Avenue as an anti-drug commercial in Mexico. It is the land of the walking dead. It is disgraceful. I've never seen it this bad in my life. And there's one reason why it's this bad. It's Larry Krasner. It all points back to him. He has stopped the gears of the criminal justice system from working. And when this happens, we saw the pile up down there. He stopped locking people up for minor possessions, which people down there in Kensington we would lock up for heroin, mainly crack sometimes. Now they're getting fentanyl. They're users. They're not selling. They have low levels on them. Now they're not being prosecuted. Well, we're not just talking about sending them to jail. What happens is they go to court and they get put in treatment programs, and they get help. Not all of them. Most of them come back to the streets and use. They're off the street. Some of them do get help and they don't come back, and they prosecute the drug dealers. That's not happening anymore. So what we see now is exactly points to Larry Krasner, is the pile up from the criminal justice system not doing what it's supposed to do. The drug users are not getting help. The drug dealers are not getting prosecuted. And we have Kensington Avenue. It is a disgrace.
That's such an important point, is these policies are fundamentally lacking in compassion because they don't get people the help that they need to turn their lives around. Mr. Bichetto, could you tell us about what the district attorney's approach to retail theft has been and what the consequences have been?
Well, the consequences have been terrible. The memo that was circulated in the district attorney's office said that any retail theft not exceeding $500 in value will not be prosecuted. The line DAs are to stand down and dismiss the charges. The consequence has been rising levels, frightening rising levels of retail theft, to the point where major and minor department stores, pharmacies, bodegas, are all moving out of Philadelphia. Wawa moved several facilities out of Philadelphia. H&K moved out of Philadelphia. All of these retailers that rely upon some semblance of enforcement of anti-theft laws are moving out. The ones that haven't moved out, they're hiring their own private police force. They're hiring their own security guards. And unfortunately, we had a situation not long ago in Philadelphia where a private security guard actually shot and killed a would-be thief. Now, you don't want would-be thieves of minor amounts of money being shot to death. But that's what happens when the system won't react and the system won't operate and people take matters into their own hands.
That's right.
I thought we, years, decades, centuries ago, got past the idea of people taking matters into their own hands and having an organized law enforcement system for a civilized society.
That's right.
We do not have that any longer in Philadelphia, thanks to Mr. Krasner.
The link couldn't be clearer between the political choices and the reality that folks are forced to cope with. And, you know, for the last year, Mr. Chairman, this committee has been examining the crime crisis that exists in cities across this country. And everywhere we look, it's the same story. It's the same three causes. It's criminal laws that don't have appropriate consequences for criminal activity. It's police departments that have been deprived of funding and personnel. And it's prosecutors who refuse to fairly and even-handedly enforce the law. It is the triumph of politics over public safety, and I agree with my colleague from Maryland 100%. We need to have bipartisan support for restoring the proper place of public safety. Fortunately, that is, I think, what you're seeing right now, is the pendulum is starting to swing back towards sanity. Even in my home state of California, the district attorney of San Francisco was recalled. The district attorney of the neighboring county, Alameda, where Oakland is on the verge of being recalled. Police departments that had their funding cut have had it restored, and a ballot initiative that would reverse some of our worst drug and theft laws is gaining overwhelming support. So the work of this committee, I think, has been very important in swinging the pendulum back the other way. And as a final note, I just want to say thank you to the victims and families who are here. Your voice is incredibly important in that as well. I can't imagine how painful it must be to relive the loss and the trauma and the horror that you went through, but your voices are incredibly important in catalyzing the change that this city and this country needs. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from this great state, Mr. Muser from the state of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. It's great to be here. Appreciate you inviting me and waving me onto this committee. Incredibly compelling testimonies. Just feel so much emotion towards each one of your testimonies. Certainly to the Fitzgeralds, beyond condolences, the Stevens, Ms. O'Connor, Mrs. O'Connor, so many real-life situations that you're expressing to us. Your testimony is very real. And it's very frustrating for me to hear some want to deny the realities of crime, of the sense of safety that people have. We're smash and grabs, and we got this new migrant crime. We got squatting. We got all these new terms basically that have been created just over the last couple of years because of the reasons that have been very well expressed here. Also the character of the district attorney. I mean, the list goes on. Us in Pennsylvania know this individual and know his shortcomings, and yet he does get reelected overwhelmingly, and he can't even tell the truth about whether or not he knew about being here, which under testimony, Dr. Fitzgerald stated emphatically, yet was even questioned. Even that was not treated in a credible manner. If we can't face reality, we're certainly not going to solve the problem. So crime is out of control. Since Krasner's been in, murders in Philadelphia, no matter how you slice it, are up over 30%. There's minimal enforcement that takes place. I mean, look at our campuses, even University of Pennsylvania, certainly Columbia, UCLA. The list goes on. There's no enforcement taking place. It was allowed to fester until it got to a breaking point, and finally they went in. And that's what's happening on our streets when you just let it go. And I don't have to tell you, Dr. Fitzgerald, or Mr. Gerace. You know it, and you see it, you live it. So the reasons are, we've discussed. Prosecutors are simply not prosecuting. As a matter of fact, in Philadelphia, the prosecution rate of violent criminals is down under 30%. 6-7 years ago, before he got into office, it was nearly 70%. And you know what? In most cities, many cities anyway, it is that high. Compare Philadelphia to San Diego. San Diego has a prosecution rate above 70%. Krasner, by the way, no longer provides the data on his prosecution rate. So we think it's about 30%. Similar sized cities, Philadelphia is a little bit larger. Philly last year, down from 509 murders, which was more than New York City, which with 1/4 the population. Last year was 389. San Diego, that prosecutes violent crimes over 70% of the time, had 45 murders. Homicides, murders. So anyway, and so that's number one. Number two is the defunding of the police. The numbers are clear. The numbers don't lie. Since 2020, the Philadelphia Police Department is down $66 million. Now, on the size of their budget and all is, I believe, about $750 million. But I mean, it's almost 10% since 2020 with inflation and everything else. So hundreds, thousands, Mr. Grace stated, down in recruitment and in force. So let's let me ask you, Mr. Fitzgerald. We already stated how Krasner lied, so we won't cover that again. But do you believe that Krasner is not prosecuting those who break gun laws, not enforcing the simple gun laws that some feel are the answer to all this? But are gun laws that exist in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia being enforced, or are they being let out as well?
As a chief of police in another state now, it's hard for me to focus simply upon Philadelphia. However, I obviously have deep roots here within the police department. And I will tell you that there is a dramatic effect in the city for when there is a lack of prosecution for gun-related crimes. I'll cite an instance. I have a family member that's in politics here who was in his district, and he said hello to someone that he knew probably should have been in jail. He talked to the person and said, "What's going on? You just got arrested for having a gun." This person had been arrested 5 times for having firearms in their possession, and said, "You know why I'm out."
So if these gun laws were enforced, you think there'd be less gun violence?
I believe that if these gun laws here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania were being prosecuted effectively, were being pursued effectively, would work. We're not perfect. No one's perfect. We're not asking that a district attorney's office be perfect or even legislature. But what we can ask for is there be a semblance of civility.
Sure.
And that civility comes with having the rule of law. And when the rule of law is not enforced, you have anarchy. And we're seeing anarchy in our cities. I'm in Colorado now. I've been a police chief in Iowa. I've been a police chief in Texas twice, Pennsylvania. Fortunately, I'm able to sort of see across the country what the ebbs and flows of violent crime, cause people, and what gun-related violence cause.
Mr. Grace, do you feel that the morale of police is low due to disrespect, defunding, and demoralizing?
100%. So these criminals, they know, they tell these cops to their face, Uncle Larry's going to let me out in a couple hours. That's exactly what happens. So the numbers in these carjackings and shootings, one of the reasons why juveniles are being ushered in, they're being arrested, and they're out within 5 hours. And we all know if a juvenile gets in trouble for something, there's no consequences, they're going to keep going.
What can we do about it?
Prosecute the crimes. I mean, this was almost a banana republic. It's a joke. It was mentioned as a circus. I know where the clowns are. You keep saying you want new gun laws. Let's enforce the gun laws that are on the books now, and we'll see what happens. We don't need new laws. We need the prosecutor to prosecute the laws that are on the books right now. And we're talking about Larry Krasner's election results. You need to know the nuances in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. The election is in the primary. He won by 6%. 17% showed up to vote. That's it. Yeah. You can put a teddy bear could win the primary, and when it came to general election, the Republican will lose to the teddy bear in Philadelphia. That's the way it is.
Ms. O'Connor, I'm going to give you a last word, please. Is there anything that you'd like to say to Larry Krasner if he did show up as he was invited? Excuse me, I'm questioning right this moment. Did you folks, did you invite him? The gentleman here did. Oh, hold on a second. Larry Krasner stated that he did not know about, whether we were invited or not, he did not know about the hearing. And Dr. Fitzgerald testified under oath that he did, in fact, know about the hearing. So, excuse me.
I think the chairman addressed that a few minutes ago.
You want to sit there and defend George Soros? You're the one here who receives contributions from him. Larry Krasner receives $1.5 million. I'm in the middle of my testimony.
I'm asking how Mr. Fitzgerald knew that Larry Krasner knew about this hearing.
No, we did not. I'm going to let Mr. Fitzgerald explain it because he said it right. What he said was there was a hearing. He told the District Attorney Krasner there was a hearing, and after that, a week and a half later, Mr. Krasner said he didn't know about the hearing. That's not being truthful because he heard it from a guy who was coming to testify and knew about the hearing, obviously because him and his wife are testifying. That's what took place.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just to remind you of what you just said a few minutes ago, you stated that the committee had not invited.
No, I was
Mr.
clear about
Krasner.
that. We didn't invite him.
I think that was the only point that was being made.
The witness, Dr. Fitzgerald, notified them clearly of
Mr. Chairman, I would point out
place.
that there is no point.
Hang on. The time belongs to Mr. Muser.
Mr. Chairman, I would point out that there is no point to Mr. Krasner coming to this hearing if he couldn't testify.
Fine. Well, Ranking Member, you lost your credibility. You lost your credibility when you compared this to a nonviolent, frivolous suit in New York, while we have people here whose family members have been murdered. Okay, your credibility was gone at that point. Ms. O'Connor, back to you, please. If D.A. Krasner were here, what would you like to say to him?
I think I said it at the end of my testimony. Jim got up to go to work that night, and his job was to save and protect our city. And he was supposed to come home to me in the morning. He did his job. If you did yours and kept criminals where they're supposed to be, behind bars, maybe Jim would still be here today. Do your job.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. I want to thank Ms. O'Connor. I want to thank you for being here. We thank we thank Jim for his service to this community, to our country, and your family as well, and to Dr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald. The same to you for what Christopher, how he served. Marissa, thank you as well. God bless you for being here. And I want to thank all our witnesses for being here today in this important hearing, where I do think, as I indicated for Mr. Ivey, where we can do some bipartisan things that will help, but we also got to get rid of the crazy policies that are, I think, leading to the consequences that we see in so many communities. That concludes today's hearing. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. The hearing is adjourned.